All right, part two, we're back. So separated the apps into two different repos. One is front end, one is back end. The front end is deployed to Netlify, the back end is deployed to Heroku. So the next thing was just dealing with stuff like, all the different considerations that I had to make that I had never made in a production level application before because I never really built one. So for starters, authentication is a big one. So how do people log into your application, and how do you ensure that people's information is actually protected when they log into your app? Initially, my thought was that I was going to offload authentication to a different service like Auth0 or Clerk, something that basically was already proven, industry standard. And again, I'm not a web developer, so y'all will hear me say this over and over and over again. The front end is like my least strong skill in development, and especially like with design. And so I wanted to kind of save myself as much design thinking or planning or implementation as I possibly could by, relying on something that was already sort of standard that people were used to seeing. So Auth0 login or something like Clerk, like these universal login pages that you've typically seen across lots of applications, they just make your app feel to me like something that people already know or trust. They've seen it before. They feel like this is like every other app. And in some cases like this, I think that's a good thing because you want people to feel confident about your tool. So that was my initial thought, was I wanted to go with Auth0. I wanted to go with something like Clerk. But as I got into the documentation and started reading about Auth0 and looking at implement like the different options and things like that, it became, again, and you'll notice this is a common theme when you're building things and deciding on whether to use a third-party tool or to do it yourself, is that there were constraints. So like I said in the last video, there were constraints with Flutterflow while I had to get off of that. The same thing happened with Auth0. So basically, I wanted to capture some additional information about a user in the sign-up form when they initially sign up. The problem with Auth0 is that you can't really change out of the box what they give you and the information that you can accept in the forms and stuff like that. And then the next step behind that was that I had to keep my database of users in sync with the Auth0 database. And that was not something that I wanted to do. I didn't want to rely on my database always being up to date with Auth0. And if you cancel an account or you delete an account, I have to make sure that this gets updated as well. Or if something gets updated in one spot, it gets updated in the other spot. I just didn't want to manage that. So even though it was great that it came with the universal login and that you could easily add social login like Google and stuff like that, which I wanted to do as well, I thought about the long-term trade-off of, is this going to come back to bite me? And it was likely, the answer was yes. So I wanted to avoid that altogether. So I decided to just go with my own auth. Now I didn't write my own auth like from complete scratch. I'm still using JWT and doing some standard authentication stuff, but I'm not using any third-party like packages. Or I guess I technically am if you consider JWT as a third-party gem, but at the same time, I'm not using a service like Devise or Auth0 or Clerk to actually handle the authentication. I'm doing that on my own. And so that was a great learning process, and also just a great way of understanding that there's so many different ways to do things, and choosing a way that works for you is really important. So I sort of knew what I wanted to do, and I also knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to manage multiple databases of users. I didn't want to keep everything in sync. I didn't want to have to find a workaround to, if I wanted to ever change the information I want to collect on sign up from a user, I didn't want to have to like abandon Auth0 and then redo my whole authentication so I could just accept extra fields or something like that. So doing my own forms and like handling my own authentication allowed me that flexibility so that whenever things change or whatever, I'll always be able to go do that. So that's the authentication piece. I think that was like really important to talk about. Talking about the actual like database. So I went with Postgres for my database. And I guess for me, Postgres, initially I was thinking about doing like a NoSQL database, whether it was Mongo or some type of like document cloud storage, Firebase, like I don't know, something like that. But what I quickly realized was that I wanted the advantages, because I was using Rails and Ruby, I wanted the advantages of Active Record. So as much as I could have gone with a NoSQL database and I could have used Mongo or something like that, you wouldn't have all the same natural advantages. It's almost like I wouldn't be using Rails to its full capacity, in my opinion. So I wanted to leverage all the things that came with Active Record that could just make my life easier when it came to writing queries and being able to find data and stuff like that. Because to be honest with you, that's also not like a super strong suit of mine, like writing my own SQL queries. Like, don't get me wrong, I can do it, but like, and I know exactly how to, if I need to like generate a query or if I need to know what tables I need to look up and how to get the information, I know. But when it comes to like writing freehand SQL without any like help or anything like that of another tool or something, it isn't my forte. So I know exactly how to query data, how to join tables, and how to get the things that I need, but I didn't really want to spend time writing queries. And if I went with something like Mongo or Firebase, something like that, I would have spent a lot more time trying to write the queries that I needed to get all my data, as opposed to just leveraging Active Record, which does a lot of that for you. And it gives you a more, in my opinion, like a more abstracted way of querying your database with things that just make a lot more sense, like the find by methods, the where methods, and those sort of things just make it a lot easier to just manage your data and query different things. And also that meant that, you know, my original database design when I was planning for Flutterflow was all like NoSQL database design. So you're not really thinking in the sense of foreign keys on each table and how you're going to join things to get data, because in a NoSQL world, you're more worried about like which documents have the information that you want and just grabbing those documents, right? So there was some tweaks that had to happen when I switched to Postgres, or decided I was going to do Postgres, to make sure my tables were going to hold the information in a way that I could query it and get it in a way that made sense for me, that I understood, and you know, I knew it would work for the application. So that was another thing, really knowing database stuff. And again, as a solo founder, I think these are the things that you really have to know to be able to make these decisions kind of confidently, right? So if I was talking to somebody who wanted to become a solo founder or start their own tech startup, you know, even if you aren't a fully seasoned software engineer, I would say that learning the object-oriented programming principles, microservices, APIs, things like that, and then also database design is like a huge thing to be able to know and understand, so that you can at least plan and think about your idea in a way that can translate into a real application, if that makes sense. So let's talk about email services. So if you're building an application, a lot of times it's gonna require you to send emails, even if it's like just a sign up email. When somebody creates an account, you likely just want to welcome them to the community, or like, you know, send them something. So emails are usually a big part of any application. Now in tools like, you know, Flutterflow or Bubble, you know, it's usually pretty easy to send an email or something like that. They typically have some type of like abstracted layer where you can just configure some SMTP settings and probably send emails directly within the no-code tools. Now, again, you're going to be sort of constrained or limited to whatever their like tiers are for sending emails, or whatever they do or don't allow. And customization wise, it probably gets tricky really quick. I didn't really use it a ton myself, but I did have the developer I was working with integrate emails into Flutterflow, and I never was able to figure out how he really did it, or where the code was really at that was responsible for sending the email. So I really don't know how he was doing it, but the emails were being sent and stuff like that. And so I know that you can do it inside of like Bubble and Flutterflow. However, when you're building a custom application, like in my example, a Rails 7 API, you have to find your own sort of solution for emails. And thankfully, Ruby active mailers or action mailers, whichever one is called, they make it really simple to like send and build emails into your applications. So I was really excited about that, because I had never used it before, but I knew that it existed, and I was like, okay, cool. Even though I'm doing this from scratch for the first time, it won't be that bad because of Ruby active mailers or action mailers. I don't know which one it is. I feel like it's action mailers. So anyway, I wanted to do that. Now, the first thing is that you have to have a provider to actually send the emails with. So think about like MailChimp, think about SendGrid, stuff like that, right? And initially, that is the route that I went. I went with SendGrid because for me, I need to be able to send both transactional emails, which are like, hey, you purchased this thing, or like, hey, you signed up, or you took this action, and that's all great. But I also need to be able to send marketing emails, which are like weekly newsletters that just say, hey, here's the updates on the product, or like whatever else I want you to know. So I needed a tool that did both of those things, and something like MailChimp wasn't really good for that. Also, I just kind of hate the UI of MailChimp and just MailChimp in general. So I was looking at SendGrid at first, and then I signed up to create a SendGrid account, and honestly kept getting this like white screen of death when I tried to log in. Literally couldn't log into my own SendGrid account when I first made the account. Now, that could have been my cache, my browser, it could have been whatever, but I tried it on multiple browsers on my computer and I was not able to log in. So I'm sure that is not everyone's experience with SendGrid, because obviously people pay for it, they use it, and people swear by it. But me personally, that was not something I wanted to deal with. I'd never want to have to worry about one day I need to send an email or engage with my audience and I just can't log into my own account. Like, that's just a non-starter for me as a brand new customer to the tool, and as my first time even trying the tool. I was not impressed. I didn't like it, so I ditched that immediately in favor of Mailgun, which I'm now using to send my emails in the application. Even though I could, it was relatively straightforward to set up like my domain in Mailgun and get the environment variable set up and get everything working with Action Mailer in my Ruby app. The problem came when I actually tested the emails in my local dev and noticed that each action that was connected to an email being sent was really, really slow. So all of a sudden, instead of like the fast loading kind of components that I had before, they're all loading really slow now. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And it turns out that by default, action mailers are sent synchronously, meaning that any request that is run as, if that request to send that email is a part of another request, the initial request is going to be blocked until that email request is complete. So to the user on the front end, they clicked the button and signed up to create their account, but the page hasn't changed, it hasn't loaded, and nothing has like updated or given them any visual feedback that something is happening. There's no loading spinner, there's nothing really saying anything is going on. And then eventually after like a second or two, the screen just suddenly changes. It's a little bit jarring, and now you're on the next screen. But it feels laggy, it feels slow. And so that was, again, a non-starter. So even though I spent all this time kind of setting this up and getting it to work, it's like, okay, now we have to figure out like this whole lagging issue, and like that just was not a good user experience. So the answer turns out that you have to send these emails asynchronously if you want them to not impede on the user experience, basically, and like slow down those responses. So what that looked like was then taking that and turning it into asynchronous calls using Sidekick. And that then involved adding Redis into the application and using Redis to actually queue up those active background jobs. So again, like it all worked, and it now is to a point where everything is working as expected. So like you can, the emails get sent and like nothing slows down for the user on their side in the UI. But again, these are all things that weren't a part of my initial design that I realized like early up front. I knew this was going to happen. I knew I had to, do this, or I could account for it early because I had never built this for production before. And so again, I think this is one of the values of doing things yourself, is that, I'm learning so many things through this project that are going to carry me into the next projects and future projects, but also make me a more well-rounded developer and just more of a well-rounded founder in general, right? So any other thing I get into, or if I'm a part of another team, or when I take these things into work, like they all sort of compound and help just build your general knowledge and skill set. And so that's why I think that it's not necessarily bad to be building things by yourself, especially if you're like really motivated to do it, because that motivation is going to really encourage you to learn the things and go through all the like headaches of like when you get stuck and blocked and have to figure things out. That's what's going to push you to really keep going and figure it out. I thought we would get through more than this, because this is already the second video of talking about this whole like startup, but this is at like 16 minutes now. So I'm gonna make a part 3, I guess, where we can talk about this more. And yeah, we'll keep going. I want to just share really everything. I want to just share the whole thought process behind this stuff, and like decisions that had to get made, because these are the things that I didn't have as a founder. I didn't have somebody sit down with me and tell me that, this was a trade-off, that's a trade-off. You don't have to do it this way, you can do it this way. There's not ever really a ton of like content like that. I feel like people always are pushing you down the way that they know is true or the way that they know works, but we're never talking about how everyone's different, every business is different, every entrepreneur is different, everybody's story is different. everyone's skill sets are different. And so that means that everyone's story and path in entrepreneurship and the startup journey and founderhood is going to be different. So that's, I guess, what this little mini series is right here. Hopefully sharing this experience will give y'all some motivation, or like help you feel like, you know, you're not alone in whatever you're, you know, building or going through or experiencing, whatever. So let me know if y'all find this content helpful, because I clearly just keep ranting and talking about like the stuff that I've gone through, but I hope that it's helpful. Let me know down in the comments if it is. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Darian. I'll catch y'all next video. All right, peace.